Well, I brought something with me today. It's something that belonged to my dad, and I'd like to show it to you. Does anybody know what this is called?
The other one.
No, really, does anyone know? I have no idea.
Upside down.
Just upside down.
It's upside
Well, my father tuned pianos, as Ed said, for many years, and this was among his tools. Basically, it's a mechanical tuning fork. You pull a lever, and it sounds a note. No cheating. I was going to say, any idea what note that was, excluding the musicians over here. I'm not sure why my dad needed this, because among his many talents, he had perfect pitch. That means that by simply listening to a note, he could identify it, regardless of what instrument sounded it, without seeing the music, without knowing which fingers to press which valves on a horn, without peeking at the keys. He could tell you the note. So he would tell you that what I just played was an A440 to be exact. Perfect pitch. I share this with you today because when I reflect on my father, it occurs to me that in so many facets of his life, he always recognized the right note. I don't mean just music. By the right note, I mean he knew the right thing to say, the right thing not to say. He knew when to push and when to lay back. He knew when to act and when to be still, always without missing a beat. And that's no easy thing to do. I'm not going to look over this part of it. That must be why you love jazz. Jazz improvisation is unscripted, subtle interplay, give and take, push and pull. Jazz musicians, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Dave Brubeck, Pastor Ed, I put you in good company there, Ed. No pressure. Rely on technique for sure, but they also have a masterful feel for their bandmates, for the song and for the moment. My father passed on that love of jazz, and for that I'm thankful. I'm lucky enough to have many of his old records. Every pop and hiss on Ramsey Lewis's The In Crowd takes me back to when I was a kid, when putting that platter on the turntable. Dad's record was so exciting, you almost felt like you were getting away with something. When I was about 10 years old, he took me to see an avant-garde jazz artist named Sun Ra. Anybody's ever heard of him? Ed has. He's one of the most eclectic musicians to grace the genre. We went to a small theater at Temple University, and man, that was a night to remember. Sun Ra, who says he was born on Saturn, give you an idea what kind of an artist this is, emerged in a cape of gold lame, and he spun around for a while before he began. When he finally sat down to play, the oddest dissonant notes filled the air. It was challenging, mesmerizing, and amazing. I didn't know what to make of it. That night, I learned the outer realms of music were really, really far out there. I'm pretty certain there were not many other dads who thought that was an appropriate Saturday father and son night, so I'm a pretty lucky guy. More recently, last week in fact, my father was in his hospice bed. My mother had placed the radio on a shelf in the bedroom. When asked what he liked to listen to, my dad said one word: jazz. Looking back, it must have been one of the last words he ever said. Last Saturday, as we sat by his side, a song by Cannonball Adderley came on. Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. Classic, mid-60s, soul, jazz, the kind Dad liked. That's it. And when we heard it, just like here, Eric, Mom, and I all silently felt the same wave of familiarity fill the air. Mercy, mercy, mercy. My father was a church organist for 32 years in Niantic at Christ Lutheran Church. You might think that being a church organist would not require improvisation. seen my father reach the end of the introduction to a hymn, pause his hands on the keys, raise his head to cue the soloist to begin, and nothing. The singer missed the cue. What to do? Improvise. Play the introduction again, pause the hands, raise the head, and then they get it. I've seen him watch a young musical accompanist in the balcony extend the slide of his trombone for a low note and lose his grip and accidentally let it drop to the pews below. Dad figured out a way to play through that one, too. That was me, by the way.
Okay.
It was Christmas Eve, and I was tired. Maybe my arm wasn't long enough. He never yelled at me for that or never raised his voice. I'm pretty certain he immediately saw the humor in it, though I don't think he could let on. Dad's sense of humor. That's what many people remember about him the most. In the past week, Mom, Eric, and I have discussed how to describe it, and words fail. But I'll take a shot at it. For starters, he was a laid-back, good-natured person, so even before the pun or funny comment, you just felt like you were talking to an optimist. I think that put people at ease. Often he'd strike up a conversation. He could talk to anyone about anything. And before the other person knew what was coming, he'd slip in a deadpan one-liner that would make them both chuckle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Instantly, any tension vanished. Around family, you'd get a more steady delivery of puns, sarcasm, or wordplay. He could be serious when he had to be, but more often his remarks lightened the mood. So that's what his humor looked like. You've all heard it and seen it. Excuse me. I'm a journalist, and you've probably heard of the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why. The hardest one to answer, why? So why did my father constantly see humor and laughter where others did not? I'm not exactly sure, but something he once said to me might help explain it. He and I were talking a few years ago, and the subject came up about people who spent a fortune on luxury cars. He laughed and shook his head. Pricey cars, he said, and this is the quote, are so ephemeral. Later, I checked the dictionary. Okay, I Googled it to be sure I got what he was saying. This, after all, was from a guy who didn't use a lot of $10 words. So ephemeral, short-lived, fleeting, transitory. See, to Dad, paying big bucks for a car that would be obsolete in a matter of years was crazy. So crazy that it's pretty ridiculous. So ridiculous that, well, it's kind of funny when you think about it. He knew what was important and lasting, learning new things, travel, family, experiences, relationships. On the flip side, he knew what was not important, which, when you examine it, is pretty much everything else. So to him, all that other stuff was fair game to laugh about. Perfect pitch. A few more observations about my dad. As a husband, he was truly my mother's partner. They would have been married 51 years last Sunday. They were best friends, teammates. He showed both of his sons what it means to be a devoted husband and father. As a father, every Friday he took Eric and me to swim at the YMCA. As a child, as you mentioned, he enjoyed swimming in the chilly, spring-fed pool at Dorney Park. He passed that love for water along to both of us. We'd swim until the chlorine turned our eyes so red we'd see halos. We also went to Norwin Pool, starting with the original pool, if any of you remember, that used to be tucked behind Pembroke School. Speaking of pools, he always volunteered to be a timer at our swim meets. That was when stopwatches looked like the one you see on 60 Minutes. Sometimes we competed in the same lane where he was a timer. Did he, in his excitement, ever stop to watch early? Never, I'm sure. Impossible. Some of my favorite childhood memories are of Dad, Eric, and me playing basketball on the asphalt courts at Pembroke. Summer evenings with the sun setting low, playing animal ball until we could barely see the rim. Do you remember Dad driving a new car in the 1970s and 80s? No, you don't. For a guy who thought cars were ephemeral and short-lived, he sure knew how to make one last. He had a habit of buying old Dodge Darts and Buicks for about $500 and driving them till the wheels fell off. Family games, card games, board games, whatever. He loved them all. Rare, I think, that he was on the winning side, but maybe he was letting us win all along. And boy, did he carry that tradition on with his 3 grandchildren. All day long they'd play, and to him, not a single minute was a chore. Kevin, Ryan, Evan, he cherished it. Of course, he bailed us out too many times to count. I was the lawn boy for a house at the corner of Prospect and Royal Avenue. Somehow I put off raking the leaves until December. So there we were, Dad and I raking leaves in the snow. Mom gave him the job of waiting up on Eric and I when we were teenagers, staying out late. That was great. He could sleep at the drop of a hat, and apparently had no interest in catching us coming in past curfew or quizzing us about where we'd been. It was more like, come in, shake Dad's foot till he'd wake up, and a quick, hey, I'm home, darling. Mostly, though, I remember his curiosity and his thirst for knowledge. He found something interesting about everything, just small delights that others overlooked. Dad's cancer diagnosis came as a surprise to me because Dad never got sick. Somehow, though, even in the darkest hours of this past year, he never complained. In his quiet way, he was also obviously a very tough, resilient guy. That's why, to quote my mom, it's not accurate to say he lost a battle with cancer. A battle suggests a fair fight. Plus, when I look around at all of you, it strikes me that he didn't lose at all. He won. He won your friendship, your admiration, and your love. But if he were here, of course, he'd say you won his. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming today. It means so much to us. And you've all said such nice things about my father and shared so many wonderful stories about how he touched your lives. I debated whether to bring this today, if it would be appropriate. But I don't think Dad ever met a gimmick or a prop that didn't amuse him. So let me ring it one last time for my dad, who had a perfect pitch